Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
First, it's a great pleasure to be joined by Sir Howard Davies, chairman of the bank that we still own, although I think by now had the previous lot who were running the country hoped a few more of your shares would be on the way to being sold. But if I could, we're going to talk a bit about RBS, I think, in a second, but if I could just talk Brexit for a moment. You know, you are chairman of one of our biggest banks. You talk to other bankers. How worried are you that the sheer lack of detail about what Brexit means for the city means we will begin to see jobs moving across the Channel to other financial centres away from the City of London?
Well, it may not only be across the Channel, it may be across the Irish Sea, of course. But RBS, in fact, as a very British-focused bank nowadays, having had a lot of foreign adventures which didn't turn out too well, we're not so much affected by Brexit ourselves. But I think
a bit, though. You do
we have
work
some
for
Western European
that,
lending, which we could book through other vehicles. We own, of course, a bank in Ireland, which is a Eurozone bank, so we could use that. We have a bank in the Netherlands as well.
When we have to make decisions on whether to shift some resources?
Well, we would need to make decisions when we know whether or not we could passport from one to another. But we don't have to set up a new entity in order to do that. We own them.
But now, I talk to leaders of big banks, and they tell me it won't be long before they feel they have to make decisions to move jobs.
That's right. So there are certainly banks who are very concerned, and they are particularly the American banks and the Japanese banks, who have an operation in London which serves all of their European clients. And indeed, the rationale for them to be in London is that it is part of the European single market, and therefore they can do all of their business from one place.
So how worried are you how little the Prime Minister has so far said about what arrangements she thinks are achievable for our banks and financial services companies?
There are two things here, I think. One is the eventual deal, and we understand that that will take quite some time to negotiate.
10 years?
Quite likely, but perhaps a bit shorter than that. But what is really important is the transitional arrangements. So what we're particularly focused on in the city at the moment is to try to get an understanding that actually allowing a cliff-edge departure of Brexit would be damaging to everybody, because about 3/4 of all European capital market transactions take place in London, often by French banks or German banks, etc., but they take place in London. If you suddenly broke that off, this would be destabilizing for the whole of the European financial markets. So what we need is a transitional arrangement as the Article 50 process starts, so that we can say, look, here is the way in which things are going to work in the medium term. In the long term, of course, I think there will be some movement of activity.
Do you have any confidence that we will get those transitional arrangements? So, for example, a particular official very close to Theresa May, I am told, regards any talk of transition as somehow betrayal of Brexit.
Well, I think that it is possible, because I think that there is a common European interest in this. And I think that those people in the 27 who are looking now at the implications of a sudden break are realising that actually that could be quite damaging to their companies, that their companies could then find it more difficult to raise money because they raise money in the London market. So I think that is the basis of a compromise. The terms of it... Do you have
any sympathy with the Prime Minister for how little she's said so far?
I can understand why you don't wish to give your negotiating position away.
But she needs to say more.
But I think that she needs to say more on the transition. Let's say, not the final outcome. I think the final outcome, well, the people have voted. Some of us might have wished they'd voted a different way, but they have, and therefore the end result is clear. But what is absolutely crucial is you don't get there in a jerky and sudden way which could be damaging to the economy, both in the UK and in Europe.
And just to, before we move on, if by the time the Article 40 negotiations are triggered by the end of March, we have no clue about the transition, how much damage will that do to banks, to the city?
Not too familiar with Article 40.
50.
Could we agree on 50? You know, just
I'll
raise you 10.
I lost 10 in the bookies overnight. But anyway.
I think it is damaging if we don't get a transitional deal, because I think you will then see banks and financial institutions making decisions on the basis of uncertainty. They will not wait because they have to make a decision which will allow them to continue to function in the event of a hard Brexit, if that's a possibility. So they will not sit back. They are currently making contingency plans, and once you've got a contingency plan, hey, there's a risk you might implement it one day. And therefore, I think that it is quite urgent.
Now, on Royal Bank of Scotland, will we get any shares sold before the election, do you think?
We have one major issue to resolve, which I think stands in the way of a significant share sale at the moment, and that is the subprime mortgage business that the bank did way back in 2007 in the United States. And we still have an outstanding settlement with the US Department of Justice. You'll have read recently about Deutsche Bank in negotiating the same thing. It's the same story. We seem to be a little bit behind.
There's a big potential loss there, and you can't value the shares until that loss is
that makes life difficult to value the shares.
Do you think the election of Trump will make any difference to the timetable for that?
It's very hard to know at the moment. I mean, some people say the existing people at the Department of Justice may have an incentive to get some deals out of the way because they'll all be leaving. Other people say because they'll all be leaving, they won't be able to bring deals to the table. I think the key thing we'll have to see is whether Deutsche Bank, who are ahead of us in the queue, reach a settlement. If so, then an earlier settlement for RBS is possible. But at the moment, frankly, we just don't know.
Now, you've set aside £400 million to cover potential claims from small businesses who feel they've been badly treated by you. Some people, though, say that you are still not being apologetic enough to the way that you treated those businesses.
Well, the question of an apology depends on really what you're being accused of. And what we were accused of at one point was of a deliberate strategy to distress businesses for the benefit of the bank. There's now been a review of that by the Financial Conduct Authority, which says, no, we did not do that. So I don't think I want to say I'm sorry about that, because I don't think I did it. Well, it wasn't me, but it was well before I arrived. But as for whether we treated those small business customers as well as we should have done, there we are sorry, because it's quite clear that the bank at that time had very complicated fee arrangements which people didn't really understand. People were moved into this resolution bit where they were being worked out without being told. Complaints were not handled properly. So yes, we are very sorry about that. That should have been handled a lot better, and that's what we're trying to redress now.
Now, finally, your great mate Boris Johnson, Foreign Secretary, says that your dream of a third runway at Heathrow will never happen, even though Theresa May has backed it.
Well, he's wrong, I think. I think that it is a perfectly feasible project. I think that the objections to it can be answered. I mean, I'm not saying it's not controversial, of course it is. The thing about Boris Johnson's view is he's not changed his view for a long, long time, and it doesn't seem that facts make any difference to his argument. He knew what he wants to do. He had landed on Boris Island in the estuary with no visible means of escape. And that's where he still is. And so I don't think he really engages in the debate.
So, Howard Davies, many, many thanks.